Alright, hello everyone, welcome back to another game recap. So this is round 6-1 where I'm playing against FIDE Master Frederick Litchfield. This is also the second round of the second double round day of this tournament, also the final double round day, and the day after this whole event you could call it, there was going to be a rest day, and then we have the last 5 rounds of the tournament, if I can do my math correctly. And given the situation of my last game where I had drawn, it was like a 4-hour game. A double round day, you sort of want the first game to finish in 2 hours. Hopefully it's not 2 hours of you getting thrashed in, but 2 hours of you thrashing your opponent's head in. Like a 4-hour game, it's not so great from an energy point of view, but okay, it is what it is. Definitely not coming into the game as energetic as possible, maybe you could say, but definitely I'm still hungry to win. And yeah, so we start off with 1d4. Also, I should note, this game recap, we are looking at it in League Chess, because this tournament, all the boards of the championships were broadcasted on DGT, so you can see the timestamps as well. Thought that would be interesting for you guys. But okay, d4, and Frederick decides to play e6. And I did have a bit of time to prepare actually before the game, not like a whole lot, but e6 is one of the things I was expecting. The other thing was potentially a Slav defense, very solid. But Frederick usually when he plays e6 has in mind this kind of dubious defense, you could say, called English, where after c4, and I should note, usually if someone plays e6 on move 1 against d4, they're kind of saying they're okay playing against French defense. There are some cheeky people out there who just are hoping you play c4 and then they play b6 or f5, transposing into whatever other opening they want to play, but they're just sort of hoping the d4 player doesn't know how to play the French and they don't play e4. But Frederick, I'm pretty sure he's actually a French defense player. But okay, after e6 I play sorry, I don't know what's going on here, c4, and now b6, e4, bishop b7, bishop d3, and what Frederick has played here is known as the English defense. It's quite important, by the way, you want to play bishop d3. If you play knight c3, then this pin is quite annoying, you want to avoid this if possible. So I play bishop d3, and now Frederick plays this move f5, which may look intimidating to some people if you've never seen this before, because if you take it, well, it looks like we're gonna lose our rook. Unfortunately, these sort of positions are just known to be pretty much lost for black if white plays correctly. This is sort of line where you can take, but you don't necessarily have to, and I think it's even stronger to just leave the pawn there and instead basically just try and play knight e2, knight f4, and just try and murder the white king, sorry, the black king rather. So what Frederick decides to do is after e takes f5, which I play, and by the way, it's kind of a known mistake to play something like this. I'm pretty sure black can at least take, and I'm not sure if they quite have this tactic working. I think they should though, and basically the idea is if white takes, queen h4 check, and we're going to be winning material. The only reason I say I'm not sure whether it works is there might be some queen h5 check shenanigans when after with g6, queen e5, there's this sort of tricky stuff, but somehow I feel like this should work out for black. Maybe not though when you just play queen h4 check and try to provoke weaknesses, I don't know. But yeah, basically f3 not so great, knight c3, bishop b4 also not too great from what I'm aware of. Maybe also knight f6, not too sure. But yeah, basically e takes f5, definitely the most critical move to play, and pretty much the only move I think that can pose any problems, because again, if you play anything else, black is just putting immense pressure on the center actually. So e takes f5 is really asking black what they're doing. We talked again about how this is not so great. So he plays bishop b4 check, an interesting intermediate move. Now the point is, if I play knight c3 now and try to block this, well, the queen h5 check doesn't really work as well, because black isn't really forced to play g6. They can put their king on f8 because they had moved the bishop out of the way with that check, right? So an important move after bishop b4 check is to go king f1 and protect this. And now, black could take, but usually they keep the tension like Frederick did. It's worth noting, if I ever take this pawn, then it's going to open their line up for the black rook potentially when they castle later. It also opens d file for the rook. You usually don't really want to take unless there's a really good concrete moment to do so. You usually want to keep that pawn f5 as long as possible. So that's why I did. I play a3, I kick the bishop out. And by the way, if you saw initially, when this is the nice thing about having the timestamps so you guys see, when I made my first move, I played d4 because my time was this, right? So I lost a few minutes on the clock because I was a little bit late to the game. But if you see the next few moves, I play them all fairly quickly, which shows like, this is my opening preparation still pretty much, and Frederick is thinking a little bit. So knight c3, this is a very accurate setup that I'm going for. Basically it's like computer approved. I go h4, and this is probably the first thing that's worth explaining in this game. So after knight c6, knight f3, where else do you develop the knight, right? So this is sort of where we understand the concept of h4, where I play rook h3, and this looks rather strange, and you will see I spent some time on rook h3. I'll explain that later, but fundamentally this is the sort of setup that white wants to go for when they play h4. They want to put the rook on h3, and the reason is a bit difficult to understand at first, but basically at some point, in a lot of variations, what black is going to do is they're going to try and move the knight out of the way somewhere. The bishop's going to hit this knight, and you basically don't want the queen to be the only defender of this. It helps a lot if you have another piece of a lesser value, you could say, defending that, and that's exactly what rook h3 does. It does look a bit strange, this whole rook h4, this whole h4 rook h3 theme, but once you wrap your head rather around the logic of it, it starts to make a bit of sense, especially when you see some concrete variations. However, this king h8 move was a little bit strange, and I was thinking also, can I maybe just go h5 and basically just try to like run my opponent's head over, because, well, king h8, I wasn't really sure what this did, to be honest. My opponent had some concrete reasons after the game why he played this. I can't exactly remember what it was though, but basically the threat of h6 is incredibly scary, and if black ever plays h6 themselves, they have to be quite alert, you could say, of threats such as knight h4, knight g6. But I think we have to be careful not to go knight h4 straight away, because if we do so, they might just be able to take this pawn, and then if you actually look at the arising position after all this stuff, well, black has actually a knight that could be fairly well established on the square. The bishop is open on this diagonal. This queen is on the f-file, which is sort of targeting our king. They have a fuckload of compensation. We probably want to actually avoid this position if possible. And I can't quite remember what the best move is, but it might be something like maybe bishop e3 first and then knight h4. But okay, yeah, h5 was definitely another interesting possibility, but rook h3 just as good. Queen e8, sorry, not queen e8 yet. I did think queen e8 would probably be a strong idea though. Maybe not. Like, the thing you have to understand about this position, by the way, I think I probably should make this clear, is that this whole English defense thing is sort of considered by theory to not be the best. Like, there are some lines you can go for, like knight c6 and like playing knight b4 and trying to win the bishop here, but this is considered a bit passive. A lot of English defense players aren't really into this. They prefer going for like this more sharp stuff that Frederick went for in this game. The only problem though is that if white knows all the concrete moves, then it's sort of just like bad news for black. And pretty much that's what happened. And I knew coming into the game that if we got a position like this, like according to an engine, it's already like close to loss, because first of all, white's up a pawn, and then second of all, black's pieces, they have potential, but at the moment they're actually not like really that active. But even with that in mind, I knew that, because I've had some experience with online blitz in these positions, that even if you get the position which the engine says is like, oh, it's winning, dude, it's still tricky. There's always like all these small like tactical tricks that we'll see throughout this game that the black has up their sleeve and white needs to be very careful of. So essentially what happened is queen e8, and I was just about to say before I went on that tangent, right, that the queen e8 in this position, I was thinking is just a little bit better, because you always want to try and tempt white into taking again, as we talked about earlier, and sort of open the f-file for you. I think that, trying to take first and white playing bishop takes f5, it does make our life a little bit easier, but nonetheless still definitely not bad for black. But okay, this is probably where I took my first sort of real thing, you could say, of the game. There's a bunch of tempting stuff, and that's the thing about this position as well. If you switch the engine on, it might actually not help you that much. It might only confuse you more in this position, because it will basically give you like 10 different moves with all an eval of one, like plus 1.5. Maybe that's slightly exaggerating it, where it's just basically saying like, oh my god, dude, you're doing so amazing. But over the board, because you have so many different like things you can do, it's almost a bit overwhelming, because you don't know which one of these good options to pick. It's difficult to know whether you should develop the bishop immediately. Should you go h5? Should you go knight b5, try to get rid of this bishop? Should you retreat the bishop to remove it as a target? Should you go queen d3, bishop g5? I forget whether I mentioned that. There's so many bloody options. You can even go d5, right? So eventually what I just settled on was bishop c2, trying to remove the bishop from this square of attack and maybe prepare queen d3 and align a battery along this diagonal. I think it was even possible also to go h5 and basically just sort of tease black and say you can't really take. I forget what exactly the reasoning was, but I have a feeling it might have been something like bishop h7, knight g5 here when there's some sort of tactics going on. Although I have to admit, saying this out loud right now, I'm not completely sure because I can imagine there would be some tactics down the F file, but I just can't see them right now. So basically though, there were a lot of good options. I decided bishop c2 is a pretty safe one, queen h5. And the whole idea behind h5 would be basically, by the way, that if they can't take, well, first of all, if they take, if we have something concrete, then that's good for us. And if they don't take, then they can't put their queen in h5, and the queen actually looks kind of stupid there. So that would be the idea behind h5. And if we could play h5, that would be very strong. And I think the engine does make it work once again. But okay, we have these fairly natural developing moves. b4. This is always an idea in these sort of positions to go c5 and basically just try and get this bishop the hell out of there, force him into complete passivity. But there's this very fine balance that you always have to watch out for whenever you have these sort of positions in the English defense, like this one, right, where sometimes if you get too ambitious, sometimes you can get too carried away. Your opponent might sort of, and especially once you start pushing like all these pawns, right, sometimes that can open up, like if it works, it can work really well, but if something backfires, it could be a little bit ugly. And I think, for example, in this position, there were a few much cleaner approaches I could have considered. For example, I've mentioned d5, and especially when the queen is on e5, this is always an idea worth considering, because if the knight goes to like any of these squares, not so great. Probably the most natural is knight e5. e7 is also a consideration, but feels slightly passive. And maybe this is what he'd go for in the game, but probably the objectively best one is knight e5. But you always have to understand, once this happens, there's contact between the queens now, and any sort of queen trade is probably going to be in, at least from a practical point of view, in white's interest, because this is going to basically just simplify the position. Of course, being up a pawn, that does make it a little bit easier to understand what the hell is going on, because there's not going to be at least as many in theory tactics. But still, we have to be careful. These pieces are active. They could potentially break c6. They could like bring the bishop around this way. Even when you exchange queens, that's not necessarily the end of the story. I think a more like accurate way to do the queen trade actually was to take this first and then go d5. And now after knight e5, they have a lot less compensation in this sort of position, because, well, their pawn structure is sort of wrecked a little bit, and if they play f takes e5, well, then this bishop is very passive. This one is also very passive, so that's not very fun. But okay, going back to what I played though, I ended up playing this move b4, and after queen g4, this is where all of a sudden I realized that maybe b4 is a little bit too ambitious, and the computer says that this is still like completely fine. But definitely from a human point of view, I started to realize that, like, oh, I actually need to like be really careful now, because, for example, d5 for one thing, I definitely cannot play this anymore, because there's going to be queen takes c4, and it's just like, yeah, not good, right? So that also, you could maybe think about a move like c5. However, then the bishop just comes here because the queen is supported in the square. It doesn't have to go back to a passive place, and I wasn't really sure what my next move was going to be from this position. I also was thinking maybe queen d3, and I'm threatening now to go takes and then mate them, but then I realized it's going to be knight takes d4 here, a very nasty tactic, because if knight takes d4, I was pretty sure this was just going to be checkmate. I indeed think that is the case, and if I go queen takes d4, bishop takes f3, and before the knight was protecting the queen, now that is no longer the case. So if I take, well, technically material is equal here, but if you look at the quality of the pieces of both sides, it is very clear that black is in the driver's seat. So for that reason, this already would just be a mistake, queen d3. It's also worth noting that I can't take and just like mate them here. That is mate, but unfortunately after knight takes c2, eliminating my bishop, I no longer have that option, and I'm basically just royally screwed in this position. So basically, like after queen g4, I had to really take a look at my life and contemplate what I had just did. Was I too careless? And I decided, no, I'm going to continue fighting. So I play bishop takes f6, g takes f6, and this is an important move, because I think if you play like rook takes f6, for example, well, then maybe I can play queen d3, and like you really have some stuff you need to think about. But G takes f6 is very tricky. It stops my knights from coming to any of these squares, first of all. You do close the f file, which is a con, but on the other hand, you can now bring the rook to the g file. And if I just dilly-dally around and play like any random move, well, they're probably going to play like rook g8, and like, I can't block this with the rook, I can't play g3 because I hang that. I'm not really sure if I even have a defense. So I play queen d3 first of all, which is the move I wanted to play, and as you can see, I have a bit of a time advantage. On the clock, I'm trying to put some pressure on him, not just on the position, but also on the clock, hopefully, as well. Rook f7 is played after some deliberation. I think rook e7 was also a bit of an option, but I believe a nice option in these sorts of scenarios, and one thing I definitely missed during the game would have been something like knight d5, rook g7, and knight e3, attacking the queen of tempo and also defending g2. I definitely missed this maneuver in the game, but at least looking at this position with a set of fresh eyes right now, I don't have my annotations with me, I think that probably is the best way to counter this whole thing. Rook f7, it is possible to still go knight d5, but after rook g7, it isn't as straightforward because knight e3 is going to be rook takes e3. However, I think we actually have, I think I remember seeing this, so rook g3 we can do, and now takes is knight takes f6, and we can play this now because the g file is close to attacking this, and they can't really move the queen to a good square now because, like, if it goes here, we exchange the queens off and then take the rook, and the bishop is also hanging at the same time. If they go here or something, I don't know, well, we're gonna take that. This is hanging, it's not very pretty. So basically, in this position, there's not really a good move for them. However, unfortunately, I didn't really see this knight d5 idea, and instead ended up settling on this move, queen f5, trying to create some sort of queen exchange here. Queen g7 is played, avoiding that quite naturally, and I would say at this point I started like fumbling around a bit too much. So like earlier I said b4, it's maybe not the best, but it was still like I had an advantage. At this point, I really started doing some questionable stuff. So I played bishop e4, and my idea was sort of to oppose his bishop, first of all, and also to maybe contemplate even going bishop d5 at some point, especially if a rook coming to g8, and sort of cause some trouble along there. But the problem with bishop e4 is I'm really sort of making my queen feel like really claustrophobic right now, because if you look at it, it doesn't really have many squares it can go to, like d5, which looks really sketchy, b5, which looks also really sketchy, and also h5, which after rook g8, g3, queen h6, my opponent stops my queen from going to, basically, and is basically saying, like, if you just play any random move, I'm gonna go knight e7, I'm gonna attack your queen. If you move your queen and take this pawn, I'm gonna go bishop c8, and I'm basically going to kill you. So I didn't like the sound of being killed, to be honest. I still want to live. I also thought if like I go queen b5, well, actually, to be honest, I can't remember what was going to happen here quite, but yeah, I avoided that for some reason, and in this position I played rook h1. Basically, I could have done this whole thing I did in the game, and by the way, g3 also looked a little bit awkward, sort of kind my rook off from the coordination I wanted it to do earlier, but I'm like, okay, it is job. Now I have to play g3 because how else do I really defend this pawn? And like, okay, but bishop e4 again, like it didn't really actually do much actually in the big scheme of things. It would have been better to just go for a move like knight d5, if rook g8, now go g3, and like, okay, my queen has a lot more flexibility, it's never going to get trapped in some sort of weird ways. I can also maybe go knight b5, and again, like rook g8, g3 probably would have been a bit more healthy, let's say. However, okay, this is what happened. Bishop e4, rook g8, g3, queen h6. I think there was even some better moves the engine was saying, but okay, this is what happened. Rook h1, bishop c8, a bit tricky. From memory again, I think the engine was like screaming knight e7 or something, and there were some ideas here. But bishop c8, this was a bit tricky, and after some thinking, I decided to play c5, which I've had in the back of my mind for a while now, but only now decide to really go for it. And of course, my last move, rook h1, the idea was to create a space for my queen to go for and not get trapped. But it really turns out it wasn't that great, because I could have played knight d5, and this is one of those moves which I just, like, it looks very natural, stopping knight e7, and it makes a lot of sense, and it actually looks something very human, in fact. And so I actually have difficulties explaining why I did not play this in the game, and I'm just going to pretend like that moment didn't happen. And yeah, rook h1, this happens, bishop c8, and we have this sort of skirmish of stuff going on. And as you can see by the time situation, we're both basically under 15 minutes. You could call this already time pressure. And Frederick spends his next 7 minutes to play bishop takes g3. And basically after I played before I played c5 even, I was acutely aware that a sacrifice like this would be possible, and I wasn't too scared of it, to be honest. But what I had overlooked when I had spent all this, not that much time, but when I had played c5, I'd sort of looked at this and I was like, if they play knight e7, like, well then I just go queen h3 where I'm going to go to, they can't trap my queen, now the bishop is trapped, good game basically. But then on my opponent's time I realized, wait a second, what if they go knight e7, I go queen h3, and then they take on g3, and hear me out, right? So we go here, they take, and after I take, because if I don't take back, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. So here, and the problem is actually they have d5, and now they're attacking my queen, discovered attack baby, and they also attack my bishop. So if I just play any random move, they're taking, and like, holy crap, this cannot be good. So there's probably even like bishop b7, I don't know. But basically that means that after d5, I am just much worse. It's just like crazy how this whole variation works out. Actually, it looks very strange, but yeah, I can't go bishop f5 because that square is like perfectly covered. Yeah, they're equal in material. And well, technically this position I'm up a pawn, but that pawn does not realistically matter. My king safety is terrible. You could make an argument for their king safety being not so great, but it's pretty difficult to get to their king. Our pieces just don't coordinate at all. Wouldn't want to be white here at all. However, not all hope was lost, because on my opponent's turn, after I played this whole c5 thing, right, I was, obviously considering what happens if knight e7 then, because I clearly saw that this was bad, and I was actually genuinely concerned at this point, because I realized, like, if this were to be my fate, and I had a feeling Frederick would actually find this, because I know he's a very, like, resourceful, tactical player. I didn't think this would be necessarily something beyond his ability to find. I was actively looking for ways I could maybe muddy the waters a bit and avoid that whole catastrophe. And then I found this move knight g5 actually, which has been an idea in a bunch of positions, and I think even in several scenarios Engine said was good, but at this point really became a necessity, because I didn't really want my queen to get stuck on h3 where it would be vulnerable to these discovered attacks after bishop takes g3. And by doing this, now I'm basically going to be able to take on f7 and basically win the queen. And after something like this, I thought, like, well, I'm just up a whole rook actually, so that wouldn't be very good for them. And if I like take, right, well then I take this, I'm up in exchange, the bishop is also kind of trapped as well. I didn't think that would be very good. They can go rook f8, and this actually I think is slightly tricky, because then when my queen moves somewhere, they have this sort of thing, right? But from memory, I think I can go h takes g5, and this whole thing is, despite looking a bit scary, it is actually just objectively lost, because this is coming next, and if they just take, well, that's going to be mate. So basically for all those reasons, I recognized in the game probably the best move is going to be rook takes g5, and after takes, I believe it was, I saw that black could play takes, and takes, and this I actually wasn't so really sure about. So I had come up with something else to actually avoid this, which is that after rook g5, I was going to play queen f3 first of all, to avoid all those sort of tactics. Now this is hanging, this is also hanging, they can retreat the rook, but I was like, okay, at least this position, technically material is equal, but I thought I have a better structure, my pieces are a bit better, they don't have any clear threats, at least in this position. Yes, I do have to be careful, but I thought at least I'd sort of weather the storm a bit, and I'm going to make it out alive. I should have some advantage. So although I was definitely panicked about this whole knight e7 thing, I think I figured something out in the game, and I think the engine also approves of this whole knight g5, rook g5, queen f3 idea. I think it was like pass 1, I could be remembering wrong though. And it turns out though that was not even really technically necessary, because Frederick ended up playing bishop takes g3 immediately, which is also scary. But after some thought, I just decided to take it, and well, I mean, like, I spent a couple minutes on it, but realistically I could have technically even played it immediately. I think the other thing I was considering though, the reason I didn't play it immediately, was because I was looking at some sort of knight g5 ideas as well, intermediate. Then I realized, like, this is probably the simplest, so I'm going to play this. He plays queen e3, which is a bit of a surprise. I was expecting takes, when I can't exactly remember what. Okay, yeah, this is right. So after rook takes g3, my idea was I was just going to take this, and when the rook was back here, it was defending the bishop, but now that's not the case. And you can give a check and sort of prepare to take this, but then I just play bishop b5 and I'm like up a whole, actually not a rook, 2 pieces. So I wasn't quite sure whether Frederick could miss that or not, but it definitely did give me some confidence. And also if he goes knight e7 to protect this and then play rook takes g3 maybe, well then I can just go queen f4 and I protect this, and I mean queen exchange, I'm a whole piece up. That cannot possibly be good. If it was, chess wouldn't make sense. So basically he played queen e3 in this position. This was maybe the best practical try. At least like you're shoving the queen in there somewhere. It's not completely clear what my best option is. If I go to knight d5, for example, protecting the knight and attacking the queen, like you have a check, you have like another check, and if I go back, like, I mean, I think you rook takes g3 and I'm gonna die, so I probably have to go to this square. But then, like, I thought at least bishop c8, and you know, this actually is not completely trivial to figure out how to deal with this threat of d6, because we can't like easily get out like these pieces out of the way. And I think the engine was saying like white's still completely winning after rook h2, but from a practical point of view, this felt kind of tricky to deal with, and I didn't want to have to, you know, deal with this sort of stuff in time trouble. It actually sort of feels a little bit easier with black to come up with moves. They have like nothing to lose. White, on the other hand, definitely does. So I want to try and figure out the best way to, not necessarily even the best move, but basically the most reliable, safest way to convert this position, because again, I am up a full piece, and I have the luxury of being a bit up on time in the clock to really figure things out. If I had like 2 minutes in this position, that might not be so great, but eventually I figured out that there is another way of attacking the queen other than knight d5. I can go to d1, and the idea is after bishop a6 check, I can go to g2. And now with queen e2 check, I do not have to go to h3 because my knight is in d1. I can block like this, and this just all felt very harmonious to me. I couldn't really see a good way to crack this. For example, if you try to play rook g7 and like stack the rooks here, I can probably just take this, I thought, and well, there's this annoying pin you're in, so you can't actually ever really take if you push the h pawn and try to like move the king up. Well, you can't even do that because this square is blocked, but I'll also mate you. So yeah, really unclear what black actually is supposed to do. And he ended up coming up with knight e7, but I just go queen f4, plays f5, really trying to kick my pieces around. And this was actually another point where I had to think a bit, because I realized I can't just move my bishop really, because, well, like, first of all, where does it even go to? There's not many safe squares. If it goes all the way back here, I'm going to have to really think seriously about the consequences of something like rook g7 happening, the bishop coming back to the square. I think it's a bit more accurate to play bishop b7 naturally, like pinning the knight, and this really does look incredibly scary to deal with. So that basically left me with 2 other options, at least in my head for simplicity's sake, which were trying to move the knight out of the way and then moving the bishop back. Like, for example, obviously if they just take, that's going to be a pretty easy win. But then there's the whole question of what to do after this. And yes, I do get bishop f3, but like the queen moves somewhere, there's still this pressure. It does feel like potentially maybe a bit unpleasant, which was why I end up in the game actually, instead of knight e5, choosing knight g5. Now the idea that you can move this, but bishop f3 and the g file is blocked, so practically it feels a lot simpler to really play. And that basically only leaves one other move, which was the one played in the game after rook takes g5. But the problem here is like, okay, if I take the queen, then yeah, this is like probably not so good, but I'm not an idiot, right? I'm going to play h takes g5. And now if you take, the rook is still going to be hanging, so like, what are you doing, right? Your whole rook down. He continued playing on because, like, you know, maybe there's a way things can go wrong, but I think I handled this pretty cleanly, this conversion phase. There was a question now after rook a2, because basically, like, I'm skewering this, right? There's no good square for the queen to move to while also protecting this, like, you can't do that, but queen exchange should be pretty easy win for me, right? So rook a2, queen g5, and I just take this, and you know, he does get the rook for 2 pieces, and my king sort of being in the center, but I was like, I'm not really scared of this. I can't see any threats, and you know, I take my sweet time just making sure I'm converting it. It's not about playing the quickest possible way to win, it's about making sure you're not an idiot and you actually win the game. And finally in this position, Frederick resigned. He didn't play till mate, surprisingly. And yeah, that basically was a very satisfying way to end the game. But yeah, it was very nerve-wracking at certain parts. Definitely, like, around here, it felt like there's all these different like tactics he has. I feel like I've sort of misplayed a bit, but I didn't exactly know where I went wrong. With, again, probably the most interesting moment being this one, where there was the whole knight e7, queen h3, bishop g3 idea. But as I discussed, probably knight g5, rook g5, queen f3 is the best line for for white when I think I still definitely keep some sort of advantage. But okay, again, taking a final look at the how things unfolded for this round. Board 2, I was against Frederick, and I won that right, which is a very important game because basically I was equal third at this point in the tournament. I was trailing behind with some other people, Frederick and Rishi Sardana, the top seed again. And because of how the events of this round played out, right, I was definitely in a very good position where I was actually sole second place at this point on 4.5 out of 6, trailing again behind Rishi Sardana by a whole bloody point, which meant that we were going to play each other in round 7 after the rest day when there was going to be blitz and rapid, but I didn't want to play in those because I just wanted to focus completely on the sort of classical chess, just let my mind reset from all the drama of the last few days. But okay, yeah, things had been going pretty well for me at this point in the tournament. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we will catch up next time when I am playing Rishi. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and see you in the next video.